If I can get everybody's attention, please. We're going to try and stay on time. Thank you for coming to this session. I hope everybody knows they're in the right place. This is Active Transportation for the Masses. My name is Phil Sarnoff. I'm the Executive Director of Bike Utah. Bike Utah is the statewide nonprofit bike advocacy and education organization. And I have the good fortune of working with all of our panelists on a really frequent basis. But leading into this, I mean, I think the message we're trying to get across is we have a lot of experience from across numerous agencies, but we're starting to hit that point with active transportation where we're getting the people who are kind of those early adopters, and how do we get those people who are more of the interested but concerned. I'm sure many of you are aware that Portland State did a study numerous years ago that broke out the typologies of types of bicyclists, and I think this also applies to pedestrians as well. But they found that there's a small segment at the top that is already engaging in that active transportation. There's a middle percent of about 60% that are interested in biking, and probably we can assert walking as well in there, but are concerned about safety. And then there's a segment at the bottom that are never going to do it under any circumstances. We haven't really done a very effective job in terms of reaching that 60%, and so hopefully through our discussion today, we can start addressing some of those issues as to how do we get from those people who are already riding to those people who we want, or walking to those people who we want to be out there more frequently. So I have some questions here. I hope that over the course of the discussion, you will come up with questions of your own, or you have questions in the back of your mind. We'll leave some time at the end for those as well. But we will start with some introductions. If you want to give your name, your role, what agency you work for, and what your agency does if people are not maybe familiar with it. Yeah, I'm Phil.
I'm new in this position. I'm your active transportation manager, so I'm focusing on planning, programming, safety initiatives,
I'm Jennifer McGrath. I am the active transportation planner for the Utah Transit Authority. Utah Transit Authority provides transit service for our region.
I'm Scott Hess. I'm the active transportation planner for Wasatch Front Regional Council. Wasatch Front Regional Council was part of the community to expand federal transportation funds to build out our transportation.
I'm Bryce with Mountainland Association of Governments. We operate in the city of WFRC and south. Utah County is the largest by population in Utah. I've been the active transportation planner for MAG since 1999, so since the turn of the century.
My division is responsible for the planning, design, and operations of the transportation system within Salt Lake City, and our goal is to meet the needs and goals of the community, so provide options for the city. So I'm a transportation planner, so my job is to particularly to make our streets and better places for people of all ages and disabilities, whether they walk, bike, or walk.
All right. And for those people who are milling about in the back, there's some seats up here. It's much like SeaWorld. You might get splashed, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So first question, and I guess we'll start with Heidi and maybe go through the whole group. Okay, so what is your specific agency interest in terms of advancing active transportation?
Yeah, of course. So the Utah Department of Transportation, we're interested in active transportation not only because measurable increases in efficiency and air quality, but just general congestion. The more people that we can get to connect to walking, to biking, and using their skateboard or transit, there'll be less people on our roads. So we all know like driving is probably one of the most dangerous things you can do in a day-to-day life.
like the DOT and like probably my coworker here next to me, our agency cares about all the same things that you guys care about. We care about air quality. We care about people's physical health and activity. We care about the impacts to our roads and congestion. But from a selfish perspective, people access transit via other modes. A few years ago, APTA did a survey of millennials, and the vast majority, over 70%, said that transit works best when it's in conjunction with other modes. They are accessing our system via walking and biking. And the share of transit users accessing transit by walking or biking has increased substantially over the last decade. And so we as an agency really need to pay attention to that. We've done a great job of setting up a great system here along the Wasatch Front, a good spine, a good network. Now what we need to do is focus our efforts on making sure that people have great access to that system and that we're reducing the barriers to access to that system. And one of the easiest and most healthy ways for us to do that is to provide better active transportation infrastructure.
So the regional council, we actually don't own or maintain any facilities. We're not a transit agency, we're not the DOT, but what we do maintain is the regional transportation plan. And the RTP is a collective plan of really the city's interest, DOT's interest, MTA's interest, and we've seen an increase in actions that are active transportation, the request for active transportation. My role is 1 year old, it's a new role with WFRC as an active transportation plan. And so really in providing a balanced approach to all modes of transportation, we want to see cycling, biking, cycling, walking be a true mode for people to get around. And it comes really born out of the local community's interests. It's my personal interest, but and the collective elected officials who make up Wasatch Regional Council, their will and desire to see this move today.
Hi, Scott. We find that our local leadership and residents are really interested in seeing these things occur for two main reasons. One is for quality of life. Quality of life is a huge issue, especially now that we have a very well-established tyranny of the automobile, if you will. When we only have cars as a choice, that dramatically affects our quality of life and our health and our well-being. And if we provide people a choice, they will actually use it. And when people are given a choice for active transportation and they begin to use it, it really affects their quality of life and begins to affect their neighbor's quality of life. So we see this as a long-term play in redevelopment of our communities and the redevelopment of the way we get around from what we've been doing for the last 100 years.
As far as the city goes, I mean, there's a laundry list of all the reasons why active transportation seems like a good idea, air quality, sustainability, and it just goes on and on. It's all day, but the bottom line for the city is economic development. It's about being a successful city. Successful cities today are attracting younger generations, attracting new businesses, and really, if we want to keep bringing people into the city, we don't have a choice for how else we're going to accommodate them. We can't keep widening lanes and taking out buildings. We need to find other ways to move people through the city. And half of our trips are 3 miles or less, which is a great distance to walk or bike. And also, dollar for dollar, it's been said that active transportation is the cheapest way to accommodate trips. A bike lane is a heck of a lot cheaper than a subway. And that was said by the San Francisco director of transportation. So it really comes down to economic development. And that's what successful cities across the U.S. are finding out. Chicago, the mayor, Ron Emanuel, installed 100 miles of protected bike lanes in his first 4 years. That was his commitment. And he said, we want all the bikers from Seattle, all the younger generations, tech companies, tech companies to come to Chicago. And Seattle said, no thanks, we're keeping our bikers, we're keeping those companies, and we're going to put a protected bike lane through the heart of downtown. So really the cities that are on the forefront of bringing in those younger generations and tech companies and economic development, they're really focusing on this. And plus it's cheap, I mean, it's not expensive, so you're getting a big bang for your buck.
some of you have been in your roles longer than others. Jim's been doing it since he was 6'2", so that's a while.
Since I was 12.
Just a few years ago. How have you seen the perception of active transportation change over the years, just within the last 5 to 10 years, I guess? And Jen, if you want to start.
Sure. At our agency, I've been at UTA. This is my 5th year at UTA, and just in the 5 years that I've been with the agency, I've seen a very significant change. We adopted an active transportation policy a few years ago, requiring that all of our projects look at, assess, and try to figure out a way to include active transportation whenever we build our projects. So making sure that we're at least assessing whether or not that's a possibility. That's something that we never did previously. Sometimes, depending on the project manager, you might have had a person who cared about sidewalks or was a cyclist and, wanted to include some bike lockers or racks, but it was on an individual basis. Now we have a policy, a mandate that we've adopted that says this is something that is so important to our agency that we're going to require it. We also did not have a dedicated active transportation employee at our agency until, I don't know, what's it been, a year and a half, something like that, really recent. So I think that really shows that UTA is taking this seriously, that we care about it both from a perspective of just benefits to our community, but also benefits to our agency, and how active transportation and providing that access can really benefit our customers and our riders and really help increase our ridership for our agency. So I've seen a big shift. I think the more we continue to do these kinds of projects and the more positive outcomes we see, I think the momentum will just build behind that.
Back in the last century, I really felt, and I think I pretty much was kind of a lone voice in the wilderness, if you will. And the last 5-10 years has been a dramatic and amazing change in Utah as far as acceptance and understanding of the need for and providing funding for active transportation. It is literally night and day. Major partners like UDOT and UTA who have come full circle and are doing things that I couldn't even have imagined 5 years ago that they're doing. Not just bringing in people like, what's your name again?
I don't know, it's hard to remember.
Not just bringing in good people so that I actually have some colleagues in Utah. I really enjoy that. But they're allowed and encouraged to get things done. We have a developing bicycle pedestrian network along the Wasatch Front especially that we're aware of, that has grown by leaps and bounds in the last 10 years. We put out a map annually that shows our regional bicycle network, and it used to be really, really sparse. And the latest one that we put out last month was really a lot of facilities on it. So it's exciting to see.
So as Jim mentioned, funding, we run 3 federal funding programs: the Surface Transportation Program, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, and Transportation Alternatives Program. And TAP is really the active transportation program. It's the smallest of the 3. It's really, very small compared to the others. You're not talking $500,000 versus $8 million in the Ogden-Lacey area between STP and TAP. But what we've done is really taken a multimodal approach to all 3 funding programs, and our ranking criteria take that into account. Our local jurisdictions see that. I was lucky enough to be a county planner and a city planner for 8 years prior to coming to WFRC, making application to these programs. And so last year, our current program is 28% of the funding has some active transportation related component to it, totaling $14.7 million. And I think that's a pretty big win compared to what, if you were to look back 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and really the fact that you've got UDOT, UTA, 2 regions, and our largest city here sitting at the same table, and I see these guys, we could have a joint workspace really says a lot about how this has changed and shifted in our organization and among all of our organizations.
And in the city, I think the big shift has been our approach to these facilities in particular. Phil mentioned that 60% of the population as a whole is interested in biking and walking, but they're concerned about their safety. And so what we're figuring out is how to make facilities that are comfortable to attract that 60%. This isn't about the spandex 1% that's fearless out on the road and have seen electric chapter. And that the bike lane people maybe the only 5%. But we're figuring out what facilities attract that 60%. So we're making short utility training trails in the city. There's less EV laterals in the office and lunch at the grocery store and our apartment. And that's what we're really figuring out. At the same time, we're figuring out how to fund those. These projects that accommodate 60% of the population attract more funding. So our budget in the city went from $200,000 5 years ago to about $1.5 million last year in capital projects for active transportation. So that shift in the type of facility goes along with the shift in funding. It also goes along with the shift in federal funding and resources. So we got a CAP grant to build a protected bike lane that included a protected intersection at the same time as new federal guidance came out supporting that type of design. So FHWA released guidance on how to build these types of things. So it's all coming together really fast from federal funding to local funding and to the shipping facilities.
And then from Utah Department of Transportation's perspective, we're really working towards integrated transportation options. So we're just taking those first steps into considering on every project what is the existing component that's in those facilities and how we want to be integrating really aggressive and innovative steps in place, signaling for safety, those sorts of things. And then them hiring my position and making the line is allowing me to coordinate and help steer the region and offer technical support and training to expanding shoulders, what one looks like versus. There's a real cognitive change. They're looking at active transportation as oh yeah, so people are saying that going down State Highway 160 a lot. So people, if they're not urban core, they're even in a really nice neighborhood, commuting to work, riding with their kids to school. It's just really, let's change focus and really have a different perspective on what we think active transportation will do better and how we can best support. So that's really kind of
There was one thing I forgot to mention too. We have gotten a little bit of help from the feds, not in terms of direct funding resources, but through MAP 21 there was some change in the language that allowed us as a transit agency to be able to use our passenger enhancement dollars to fund projects that are directed towards pedestrians and cyclists. So whereas in the past we were using those funds basically to build bus stop shelters and put in benches and garbage cans and things like that, we now have flexibility based on that language to be able to do things like partner with the city to put in a bike lane if it's within 3 miles of a transit stop. And if you think about what that means for our community, I'm talking fixed guideway, rail stops, but also bus stops. If you draw a 3-mile radius around all of the bus stops and train stops in this region, you've almost covered the whole region. So we now have the flexibility to partner with cities and really help implement some of those things, fill those sidewalk gaps that were existing around our transit stops to really help connect people better to the system. And that is a result of the federal language.
Does anyone have questions at this point? Yeah, go for it.
addition to that, and having worked with UDOT Region 1 and Region 2 and communities, having a plan is really beneficial. So it's easy to be passive with those state-owned roads going through your city and think that, you know, my public works department does not plan for those, so we don't have anything in our general plan. Even just putting what your will and desire is, whether that's identifying it in some sort of complete streets policy or ordinance, or in your general plan having an idea for what you want that street to look like, is going to greatly increase your chances of the DOT doing something that your city would, you know, wants or desires on that roadway, as opposed to when the orange cones go up and the asphalt's being milled, approaching the project manager at that time and saying you'd like a bike lane or a wider sidewalk or street trees. I mean, right, it's really, it's more of a planning issue, so you want to get in front of those as often and as much as you can. And so I'd urge the communities to plan your state-owned routes just as you would any other street in the city.
If I could jump on top of that, that is something that we have learned very powerfully in Utah County and at MAG, is that UDOT, as the department becomes more willing to deal with and to implement bicycle, pedestrian, active transportation facilities on their network, they need the support, they need the decision-making to be made at the local level, so that when a city comes to them and says, hey, we want a bike lane, or we want a protected bike lane on this particular state route, the DOT isn't saying, is this the city doing this? Is this a particular interest group that's saying this? Will you back us up when we start taking parking off the street in order to identify bike lanes on this facility? And if the city has identified that in a plan and said, yes, we're going to back you up, we've planned for this, we want this, it makes it so much easier for the DOT to say, yes, okay, then we can do it, we can implement this, than if there was no plan to begin with. The DOT isn't in the habit of pushing their will as much anymore on the locals. They're really more they're really getting more into the way of doing things, of saying, what do you want to see happen? And if you want to see active transportation on these state facilities, let us know that. We need to know that, and we need the political cover in order to do that. Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Did everybody hear the question?
Also, there really
Was
are
there-
seats up here. if you guys wanna
There
come
are
sit
some
down.
seats up here.
The question was, has there been any initiatives or efforts by UDOT to separate facilities so that you have a roadway, but you also have some sort of multi-use pathway or paved trail in order to separate bicycle and pedestrians from vehicles?
UDOT has, in the past, been very reluctant to include, we'll call them trails, off-road facilities, off-road pathways. For two reasons. One is because they pretty much, those kinds of things either take place outside their right-of-way, or if it's inside their right-of-way, they don't maintain those. They don't know how to maintain those. They don't have the equipment to maintain those or the manpower to maintain those types of facilities. And so they're learning, and the cities are learning, to partner with UDOT and say, okay, if you will build this within your right-of-way, and we bring to the table, we're going to do this. We're going to operate and maintain it in perpetuity. It's much easier for UDOT to then build those kinds of facilities. One of the things that we have learned over the years is that off-street facilities or trails are gateway drugs. Those are gateway drugs to active transportation in other forms. It's what gets the other 60%, 70% of the population interested in active transportation, because it is comfortable, because it is something at their speed. It's something they don't feel like they're threatened by traffic, except crossing University Avenue. And we try to solve those as we can. Those are key elements to the active transportation system. And having the department become comfortable implementing those, and they've done those at times, but they really need to have good, strong, lasting partnerships with the locals to feel comfortable putting those on the ground.
And I would say that the first kind of catalyst for installing trails in conjunction with UDOT is the WFRC project, which connects the northern portion of the T-15 City with Farmington and I-15 and Highway 9 in Davis County. And that roadway proposal through the planning process and walked through this big thing. The design outcome was that there would be a separated multi-use pathway next to and so a lot of people at the DOT say, oh, we don't build trails, but we do. And I think that is probably commonplace with newer infrastructure projects and just within a lot of the other education definitely as well as well. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna go on. Oh, all right, George. Right, that's a great point. That trails in most circumstances. I mean, St. George is a perfect example. I mean, they have a great trail system, but you need to be able to get to those locations where you're trying to go, unless it's just a purely recreational trip. Yeah. Can you use the mic?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, the city transportation division is coordinated with the RDA as part of their development process so that we're getting our transportation, is that better? Okay. Our transportation and trails projects incorporated into the site plans for these developments as they go in. So a good example is at the end of the S-Line in Sugar House. There's a big apartment project in the works right now. And there are 2 trail projects that intersect at that corner as well. And so we're coordinating with RDA and the developer to get those trail projects incorporated into their site plan. So I think that's one example that applies in a lot of situations.
From our perspective, we have a TOD department. We have folks that are specifically dedicated to working with developers and with cities and counties in the areas directly surrounding our stations to make sure that those developments happen in a way that makes sense for those people who are going to be living and working in those areas. And we also partner with cities, counties, and the MPOs on additional small area plans that may or may not be considered a standard TOD, but we have a lot of involvement in the TLC program, with WFRC, and so it's in our interest as a transit agency to make sure that we are working closely with our partner agencies, but also with the developers to make sure that those communities surrounding us are developing in a way that makes sense for transportation users, transit users specifically.
Everyone's okay. Oh yeah. Yeah, please.
So how do we get kids back online?
So that's really where my, yeah,
I'd be happy to answer that question. We're actually in the hiring process right now for a youth education coordinator. We're launching a school-based bicycle education program, and it's a combination of getting kids on bicycles. We'll bring all the equipment and necessary instructors, as well as doing bike walk audits with the community, because I think as the keynote speaker this morning spoke to, you can do all the encouragement in the world, but if some kid has to get on a 4-lane road to get to school, it's not going to work. And I think that's a really critical piece that all these folks have brought up is in terms of planning. There was a study out of England very recently that said that 85% of people walking and riding bicycles is based on infrastructure. So you can do all the encouragement in the world that you want, but if there's not a safe place for people to ride, they're not going to do it. So, and I can give you more information about that program.
Yeah, parents are very risk averse with, can my kid get to school safely? We have a Safe Routes to School program here in San Utah that I'm going to be helping to kind of re-engage and be more progressive. We're also, the Utah DOT has started, I think we're in our 6th or 7th year, a road dispatch program, and we partner with Department of Public Safety, local health departments. We go into communities and we do bike rodeos, we give away helmets, we engage local schools, we try to identify people that are bicycle activists and pedestrian activists in the local community and supply them with resources on how they can access funding, find out planning information, utilize the DOT, EPA if it's within kind of our urban core, and get people interested and enthused about bikes. And it's basically like we just drop in and provide those educational resources, share the road template, kind of road respect, how to get kids and people safely interacting on these bikes roadways.
I'm going to jump into one more question because we're coming up on the end of our time. What has been the key factor for you and your agency in terms of changing perception and advancing implementation at a more rapid rate? Let's go with Scott first. There you go.
So I think this right here, this collaboration. I mean, the fact that none of us do anything in a silo anymore. WFRC having not, own or maintain any facilities, we rely on many of the people in the room and here, as well as transit agency, DOT. Nothing happens alone. So I'd say collaboration is the #1 thing that we've done, and and leading to what I think is really monumental. And if you're not familiar with this, our region submitted a Tiger Grant application, federal funding application, completely active transportation base that's really unprecedented, for $28 million in improvements that are related to first and last mile approaches. So that's 60 plus communities approving projects in their local cities, counties, the WFRC, on DOT roads to access UTA facilities via both recreation, commuter routes, getting that 60% interested but concerned crowd, because if you can get, you know, a mother and a trailer with their kids, they're going to be more likely to get out, and mothers really make the transportation choices in the household. So it's cohesive and holistic, and we're really hopeful that we get it. And even if we don't get it, basically the fact that that Tiger Grant application was done and happened and submitted just speaks to the strength of the partnerships. So that's really the most important thing that I think has happened.
100% collaboration and relationships. There is absolutely no question that we could have done a lot of what we've done over the last 5 years that I've been working on this without those. And certainly the example that Scott gave. I mean, I'm looking around this room and I see there are people dogging this room that actively participated in putting together that grant application. 6 counties across our region, Wasatch Front and Wasatch Back, all the way out to Sonora, $28 million. How many hundreds of projects total was it? I don't know, 340 separate individual projects. If we didn't have the level of collaboration that we do in this region, if we did not have the relationships, the solid, trusting, hardworking relationships that we've built over the years, there is no way we could have gone to that many communities and said, hey, we really need you to come up with a whole bunch of information in like 2 weeks. Can you guys do that? Because we want to try to get like $30 million for our region to build active transportation, and every single person stepped up to the plate, did way more than was even reasonable for us to ask, and as a result, we have this amazing product that may or may not bring us any money, but has brought us closer together and has given us a really solid plan that is prioritized in a way that makes sense for our community. And even if we don't get $1, we have an amazing plan that we can work towards implementation, maybe at a little smaller scale than we had hoped, but I have no doubt that it's those relationships and that collaborative attitude that we have here in the Wasatch Front that got us to a place where we could even attempt something like that.
I think the biggest thing that, other than relationships and other than that collaboration, which is huge and which makes what I'm going to say next possible, is having success on the ground, getting implementation, getting something on the ground that people can point to and can enjoy, and can therefore say, look, this is what people really like doing. People really love these trails. People are using these bike lanes. Once you get the smaller successes, they lead to medium successes, then lead to larger successes. It's been a long time coming, but 3 years ago we opened what has been in my career a crowning achievement, which is in Utah County. We call it the Murdoch Canal Trail. It's 19 miles long. It took about $18 million. Required the cooperation and collaboration of 4 federal agencies, Congress, literally Congress, a private water company, 7 cities, a county, and ourselves. And it has been a tremendous success. We get about 1 million trips on that every year in Utah County. It's hugely successful, but that wasn't where we started. We started with much, much smaller successes. Half a mile here and a mile here. My first big success in 2001, 2002 was what we call the College Connector Trail. It runs between BYU and UVU in Orem and Provo. It's about 2 miles long. That was a huge success for the time. But those are the kind of things that lead to those bigger successes and begin to develop a system, a connected system, if you're starting from scratch, start from scratch and get something on the ground.
To echo what Jim was saying, for us, I think the key factor in facilitating changes in perception of active transportation has been crossing the tipping point to kind of normalize active transportation, where it's not this strange thing that people do, where you get something on the ground and then you see a mom out there throwing handlebars, which I'm not recommending, but you can feel safe doing it. And where, people start seeing people out there, in flannel shirts and suits out there on a bike, it becomes normal. When the first out bikers went on carousel was doing phone it on the radio, I was listening to it and it's like, oh, this could go really bad. But someone called in and said, it's great, I love it, I use it every day, I never biked before, I feel so comfortable, I'm on my cell phone. I guess that's a separate issue.
Distracted biking.
Yeah. And just an example from this morning, I came into work and one of our construction inspectors, who's always kind of looking at me skeptically when I come to work on my bike, big handlebar mustache, leather jacket, rides a Harley. I feel like he's recess for doing bike stuff. I saw him cruising on a green bike and parked at the station, blocking the building. So I'm not sure if he was trying to prove us wrong. That's a stupid idea, but he's using it and he seems pretty happy. So I think it's getting normal, and I think safety in numbers and success in numbers are kind of built in.
And just really quickly, Salt Lake City is a really good poster child for having marginal facilities that turn into world-class facilities. I mean, 10 to 15 years ago, the Salt Lake Transportation Division was chasing their pavers around, putting bike lanes in, and without those small successes and those tiny little things, you wouldn't have the nation's first protected intersection go in last year and have this world-class facility. So if your first success is a disconnected bike lane on one section of state highway as part of a mill and fill project with your DOT, take that success, because that's the beginning of building out your network. And don't ever marginalize those small successes, because ultimately they build out to be what Salt Lake and MAG and WFRC and all of our facilities ultimately will become.
Anything to add, Heidi?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is the new standard, right? The more people that you can get vested and interested, the more momentum you will have for.
Well, and I think a key piece of that is everybody has skin in the game, whether you're health department, whether you are the person who handles the budget for the roadways. I mean, with budgets being what they are and healthcare costs being what they are, everybody has some interest in creating this better mode of getting around. Yeah, we can open up some questions now. Yes, go ahead.
Some of those improvements that you've done, specifically in Salt Lake, the dedicated areas for the bike have been controversial. Can you characterize maybe how to go about bringing the general public along?
I think Colin has a great example of that. You did it one way and then you did it a different way. So I think that's a great story.
And data. I think data really helps justify projects.
Yeah, it's kind of getting over the hump, I guess. Getting the first one in. There's a lot of perception that doesn't necessarily match with reality. So, like Heidi said, the data is really important. So we did interviews with all the business owners. About 60% felt positive about the change to the street. About 20% were neutral, and then like 15 to 20 weren't supportive. But you only hear from those 4 or 5 businesses that aren't supportive, and not the other 60 to 80% that is very supportive. So there's a silent majority out there that is applauding what you're doing, and then a really vocal minority that might object to it. But as you get that first one in and get over that hump, it's more smooth sailing. So we did a second one a year later, and it was like crickets. Everyone was still kind of focused on the street a block away where the first one went in. But the second one in, we made a few design changes. We did a lot more outreach, meetings on the street, open houses in local businesses. Really started 2 years in advance with our outreach. And I just want to say that, like, there's a 6-word dagger for any project, which is, I never heard about this project. That's like the death knell when someone says that. So you can never do too much outreach for any project. As long as people are aware, there's usually some level of acceptance. That's kind of a tag-along point, yeah.
More than half my time is extremely rural, and
some context, this is Summit County, right? For people that probably don't know. So Park City, Kimball Junction, there's some other ones. Heber. No, not Heber, it's Wasatch. Yeah.
I'm talking more like Oakley, Francis, Camas, Henniker. There's going to be crazy development in the next 20 years that our residents really are really just say the roads have been fine. They like the way they drop their kids off at school. They like the way they move around the community. And it's hard to talk about where we're going in terms of our transportation network. And I'm just wondering if anyone on the panel who has perspective that I should maybe consider.
Yeah. So like working with children, right? You can get kids enthused about biking. And like, oh, Mom, Dad, this is awesome. Like, let's go grab ice cream or let's bike to Grandma's house. You know, it's like a half mile away. You know, so like getting kids enthused about it, they can then, you know, plant those seeds with their parents or guilt their parents, you know, hopping on a bicycle. And then once you're experiencing active transportation, there's a cognitive twist. Like, oh my God, that car passed me with 3 feet. I'm never going to do that just like this again. You know, so it's just getting people on the bike for the first time is probably the biggest barrier, or even getting them to walk. So just education and outreach.
I actually think for you guys a values-based approach is probably one that you'll really need to rely on and probably will give you some success. Understanding what the values of that community are and then finding ways to tie active transportation to those values. So if, you know, safety is a value for that community, figuring out a way to talk with them about how these kinds of infrastructure projects can provide safe access for their children to school or to their friend's house or to grandma's, or if, you know, development is an issue for them and they're worried about density and things like that. Talking about how if you can provide, you know, certain types of trail projects or relieve congestion on roads that, you know, people will be more likely to want to live in certain places so that they can have certain kinds of things and in other places for other things, and how, you know, these projects can help them maintain the quality of life that they have. And that's going to be different for every community, but really digging into what are those values for that community and how can we figure out how to tie those active transportation projects to those values.
And you talk about your growth, and that's your biggest opportunity. So my city planner hat goes on, and I think start with a plan. It's so much easier to plan your trail network out before development, and then the developers build that out as you get it. You get piece by piece, as opposed to trying to figure out connectivity through subdivisions that were built 20 years ago with multiple cul-de-sacs, and now all of a sudden you can't get through there. There's no more connecting roads. So even just starting with the plan and getting it, and there's a reason why homes are more expensive, why values are better in areas where you have connected trail networks, connected streets, safe streets. It's honestly your biggest impact or your biggest potential is those new residents who will come in and get one of those subdivisions that have trail connections, and they'll start clamoring and begging and asking for it, and it'll change. You're not going to, you won't change the perception of those folks who have lived there their whole life. It's those new people. It's the growth that you have that is going to really change things.
All right. think that's a good point. Jim, I believe the Murdoch Canal Trail was pretty much started off by somebody who was interested in an equestrian facility, right?
It was
So-
started off by a mayor who wanted to ride his horse
So,
along an open canal. Unfortunately, he didn't get to do that along the open canal, but now he can do it. And we actually have a mayor who likes to drive his little wagon with the surrey on top behind the horse along the trail. It's one of those kind of facilities where we have about 100 feet of right of way because of the canal right of way. We have 15 feet of asphalt and 85 feet of horse facility. So it works out pretty well that way.
so there are opportunities everywhere, I guess, regardless of what mode they are choosing to get around. Any other, yeah.
So right now we're at the stage where we're getting our regions, we're doing the bulk of the work, to consider advocacy. We don't want to just take the step and say we don't consider it, and this huge step. And hopefully we'll be more productive and it's not so much oh, we'll consider it, but it's like, what do we do? So, we definitely want to take those steps. But yeah, it's tricky to take those steps and having, like what Scott said, the plans in place with the community, with the community mindset and kind of aligning with what we need to be providing for our
Experience everyone partner with UDOT projects in the region. An example is State Street in Salt Lake. So we're actually partnering with WFRC and UDOT. We got a WFRC PLC grant to plan our local plan for State Street. UDOT's doing the traffic analysis, and then planning to do a local plan that gets submitted back to UDOT for them to implement in cooperation with the city. So everyone's at the table. You don't need to be an advocate for those stones into from outside the process through the process and everything like that. You just need to plug in at the right points.
Well, and one thing along those lines is advocate and plug yourself into the process as early as you possibly can. Once budgets have been set and plans have been made, it's very, very difficult to get things done. Do it as early as you can and as often as you can, and bring something to the table. Don't just demand or make requests of the DOT. Bring something of value that they can get out of this project.
All right. That pretty much covers our time. I am sure that these folks, as well as myself, are happy to stick around and hand out business cards. I pretty much see them on a daily basis, this whole collective. So we're all really engaged in this, and I think there's a huge wealth of resources up here. So feel free to reach out to them right now or track them down afterwards if you'd like more information about other ideas. So let's have a round of applause for these folks, though. Thank you.